You walk into your local church in a small Colombian town. You've been coming here for 12 years. You kneel before the same wooden saint, a weathered, humble figure carved over 300 years ago. You pray to him every week. You know his face like you know your own father's face. Then one day you come back, and he looks like he just walked out of a drag makeup convention. This is the true story of what happens when restoration goes catastrophically, hilariously wrong. This is the story of Saint Anthony of Padua, a 17th-century wooden statue that was supposed to be saved. Instead, it became an international laughingstock and proof that sometimes the worst thing you can do to art is try to fix it. First, let's talk about who Saint Anthony actually was. Anthony of Padua was a 13th-century Portuguese Franciscan friar and doctor of the Church, renowned for extraordinary preaching, wisdom, and miracles. He's not some minor saint gathering dust in religious history. Saint Anthony is the patron saint of lost things, based on a story where a Franciscan novice stole his psalter, and when Anthony prayed for its return, both the thief and the psalter came back. In religious imagery, Saint Anthony is especially beloved because apart from the Holy Family, he's probably the only saint depicted holding the Christ child in a particularly tender way, often shown holding the child Jesus while surrounded by white lilies representing purity, innocence, and integrity. When statues show this scene, there's an intimacy to it, a spiritual tenderness, a moment of divine grace captured in wood. This was the statue in Soledad, Colombia, carved in the 1600s, standing in the main church for centuries. The town's patron saint, watching over the faithful, absorbing their prayers. Then came 2018. For over 350 years, the wooden statue had survived wars, revolutions, climate changes, and the general chaos of human history. But it couldn't survive termites. The relentless little wood-eaters had done their damage. Galleries of tunnels honeycombed through the wood. Chunks were missing. The paint was flaking. The surface was compromised. The church leaders made a reasonable decision: send it out for restoration. This seemed like a simple fix. Get it cleaned, get it stabilized, restore the paint where it was damaged, a basic conservation job. The kind of thing done thousands of times a year on religious artifacts all around the world. The restoration cost just $328, which the church paid for the work. The artist, and we should probably call them an artist, though experts would dispute that, took the job. And then something went terribly, hilariously, catastrophically wrong. When the statue was unveiled, the parish couldn't believe their eyes. Saint Anthony looked like he'd spent the afternoon at a 1980s makeup counter. Both he and the baby Jesus in his arms had been given what can only be described as a complete glamour makeover. We're talking eyeshadow, we're talking blush, we're talking lip gloss. One parishioner told Radio Caracol, "He is no longer the same patron that I have prayed to for the last 12 years. They applied eyeshadow, blush, and even gloss on his lips. He looks effeminate." And it wasn't just mild touching up, this was intense. This was Vogue magazine just exploded on a 17th-century wooden saint level of makeup. The eyeshadow was so heavy, it looked like he'd been crying for hours. The blush was so pink, and applied so dramatically that he looked permanently startled. And the lip gloss, shiny, glossy, completely unnatural, and anachronistic. Social media exploded with outrage. Some parishioners said the makeover had turned San Antonio into a saint of modern times, a transsexual saint. The comments were brutal, the photos spread online, and suddenly the Diocese of Soledad had a viral crisis on its hands. Here's the thing, nobody really knows what the artist was thinking. There's no statement, there's no explanation, there's just glitter. But restoration experts quickly identified the problem. Juan Camilo Duque, a restoration expert from Soledad, pointed out that antique polychrome wood sculpture can only be restored using very specific techniques, which the artist who worked on San Antonio de Padua definitely did not use. Polychrome means many colors. These old statues were hand-painted with specific techniques perfected over centuries. The paint is delicate, the pigments are historically accurate. The application follows aesthetic rules developed over generations. What happened here? It looks like someone took a paintbrush, looked at the statue and thought, you know what this 17th century saint needs? A makeover episode. Let's go full modern. The eyeshadow technique looks like it came from a cosmetology textbook. The blush was applied like someone was getting ready for their first night at the club. It's as if the restorer had never seen an old religious statue before and decided to modernize it based on 2010's beauty standards. The outrage wasn't just about aesthetics. It was personal. It was spiritual. These weren't people visiting a museum. These were faithful Catholics who'd prayed in front of this statue for their entire lives. They'd brought their children to see it. They'd lit candles in front of it. They'd whispered prayers to it in moments of crisis and grief and hope. And now their saint looked like he'd just gotten a spray tan and a full face of makeup at a shopping mall. Giovanni Montero, a former Secretary of Culture, told local media that the person who worked on the statue, whom I do not qualify as a restorer, practically deformed the original features of the saint. He was right. This wasn't restoration. This was mutilation dressed up as conservation. The church was forced to acknowledge the disaster publicly. The parishioners demanded answers. The artist, whose name was mercifully not publicized, essentially disappeared from the narrative. But here's what's really important. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a symptom of a much larger problem in art restoration. There's an entire global history of restoration gone wrong. Some of the most famous cases happened because untrained people were allowed to work on irreplaceable artifacts. This case brought back memories of the controversy around Ecce Homo, an oil painting by Elias Garcia Martinez that was completely ruined by an 80-year-old amateur artist who was allowed to carry out restoration work on it. The Ecce Homo restoration in Spain in 2012 became a global meme. An untrained elderly woman attempted to restore a priceless 19th-century religious painting and turned Jesus into what looked like a chimpanzee. It was tragic, it was hilarious, and it became the international symbol of restoration disaster. But unlike Ecce Homo, the Saint Anthony statue didn't become famous worldwide. It sat in Soledad, shocking the local community, a monument to what happens when expertise is replaced by confidence.